Imagine you were considered a well-gifted, intelligent person. Some may even claim you are a genius at your subject. Your writing, from its nascent stages all the way to its conclusionary works, are considered exceptional, and your magnum opus is considered a generational novel that has embedded itself into the zeitgeist and continues to influence its readers today. However, there is a darkness within you, something you were born with, and it was hereditary, something you cannot control. Today and the next few weeks, we will discuss the life and the works of David Foster Wallace. Hello and welcome back to the library. And before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to introduce my guest this week, the enigmatic aviator himself, Mr. Matthew Cortigiani. Welcome to the show, Cordo.
Hi, Phil. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a first for both of us. First time I'm recording anything over, a Zoom call, if you will. I'll just say Zoom as a general thing, so my work doesn't catch me. And we'll see how the audio ends up being edited. But I had a successful test run, and maybe it's a little bit different. Who cares, really? Like, this is just a fun little thing that we do. Now, before we record these in a couple of sessions and we do part one today, do you have any questions or expectations for the first part? Anything you want to know more about his early life? I know you read the script, which is actually unique. Most people I send it to don't. So anything you have to add at this point?
Yeah, well, especially going through the great detail in which Infinite Jest is written, and it's fascinating how David Foster Wallace really digs into the specifics of things like junior tennis and addiction. And I don't want to spoil too much of how the book goes, but I really want to see kind of how his upbringing, how his life experiences gave him the background to write so confidently and so expertly on these topics.
It's great that you mentioned confidence. We'll talk about that as well. And just to let everybody who's listening know, the way that this is going to be structured is that we'll do his life and works in the first two sections outside of Infinite Jest. And we're going to do Infinite Jest on the third part, which is, I think, appropriate for DFW, as I write a couple of times. Realistically, Infinite Jest just jumps around all over the place in timeline. And we'll do that for his life and work as well. Perfect, right? So, born on February 21st in 1962, David Foster Wallace is in one of the last years that is officially arbitrarily defined as the Boomer generation. 1964 is the cutoff. His childhood will be heavily influenced by academia all his life. Basically, this will include being around tertiary education and beyond. But before we get into that part of his life, let's talk Dave's parents, right? Dave was born in Ithaca, right, New York. His father, James, was a graduate student at the time at Cornell when his son was born, which was something you could do back then, be a graduate student and have kids.
Long gone days.
Yeah, I know some people who are able to do it, but who knows? Few and far between. His father's family came from a long line of professionals, which is all I got about that part of the biography. But his mother had a more interesting background. Sally came from Maine and New Brunswick in the farming stock, New Brunswick being New Brunswick, Canada. They probably were farming potatoes based on the region's farming culture. And she was the first in her family to actually get a bachelor's degree. Smarty pants. The family really did like Ithaca quite a lot due to its access to nature, right? It's just on the foothills of the Adirondacks there, though it snows a ton. It's southwest of the park. It's like at that curbing point where they get all the lake effect snow, as well as, the Adirondacks being right there. So if you like snow, it's what's there for. They did leave New York for, let's say, browner pastures, literally, when Jim accepted a position in the philosophy department at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, I believe it is. It's close to, I believe that's how you pronounce it. At first, the couple found Urbana pretty bleak, but the mood changed when, and the timeline here isn't exactly known. I couldn't get the timeline if you catch my drift. But Jim's position got on the track to be tenured, and they had a daughter 2 years younger than Dave, named Amy, shortly afterwards. Sally went back to school to get her master's in English, put a pin on that, and they bought what D.T. Max, which is the biographer of David Foster Wallace. I think it's the only biography out there, and it's what we're going to be quoting mostly from his source in his book, which is, let's put it out here right now.
Is it Every Love Story is a Ghost Story?
Every Love Story is a Ghost Story is the biography. Thank you.
No worries. Thank Google.
Thank Google. You got it quicker than I did. I assumed they paid exactly 3 sticks of gum or whatever pocket change they had back in 1969 because they bought a house. It was a 2-story yellow house near the university. Dave had an ordinary and happy childhood, with the caveat that both parents were academics. So, as happy as academics could be.
No pressure.
No, none. He, from a young age, was incredibly smart. His whole family were brainiacs, and where the rest of the Wallaces excelled in the literary, Dave was equally intelligent in the logical. An example of his family's wit was that they all simply decided to start referencing that delicious dessert as 3.14159. They made it all the way to the 9. Dave's friends would also challenge him to memorize numbers up to 25 digits, and he would be able to do it pretty easily and regularly. I knew kids like this in grade school and high school. I don't really know where they are in life anymore, but they love to memorize numbers.
Yep, never mind.
His intelligence would be either fostered or rejected by older figures, specifically teachers, depending on if they recognized him to be excitable, because he was constantly bored, and learning he found that sometimes annoying in his when he was very, very young, because he needed constant mental stimulation. A story from his biography highlights this. When attending his local summer camp, he simply walked many miles home when he disagreed with one of the counselors. His mom had to drive him back to the camp, but before she dropped her son off, she demanded to pick up her son. And when they finally admitted they couldn't find him, she revealed to them that it was because he walked all the way home. Smart woman there.
Yeah, absolutely.
His family did have a strict afternoon regimen, though this is more out of what I could call being an academic order. It's not really cruel. The family would eat at 5:45 p.m., then the father would read stories to the kids at the table. Then the kids got exactly 15 minutes in their beds to talk to one another. And then they got time each night to ask their mother questions. And lights out every day at 8:30 without exception. Quoting his biographer, quote, "In David's eyes, the household was a perfect, smoothly run machine." He would later tell interviewers of his memory of his parents lying in bed, holding hands, reading Ulysses by James Joyce to each other. Not light stuff. Ulysses.
No.
Yeah, Ulysses would have a huge effect on him as a young kid, for sure, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It would influence him, and I can only imagine that through osmosis it'll influence his writing as well. He loved both his parents, but it seems like he loved his mother a little bit more at certain points, though that will change. She had a knack of correcting everyone's grammar and would go up to the grocery stores, clerks, and cause a minor kerfuffle when they pointed out that it should be 10 items or fewer, because 10 items or less is grammatically incorrect. This might sound familiar if you read arguably his most well-known book we've already talked about, Infamous Jest, and one of the personality traits of Avril Incandenza is to correct people's grammar constantly. By the time Dave was 10, his mother began teaching English at the local community college, and he became a part-time latchkey kid, depending on if his dad was home writing or reading a book at that point. Dave also read extensively as a child, mostly adventure books like the Hardy Boys. He also read Dune, and at a really young age, and honestly, Dune is very dry to read at this point, but
No.
Have you read Dune?
No, I've seen the movie, but I can't imagine that that's exactly a young age read.
Yeah, some kids are able to read pretty dry stuff like Lord of the Rings and stuff. It can be pretty dry at times, but let's leave it as, Dune is as dry as the desert they are described. Both Wallace children were also allowed to watch any movie they wanted at the movie theater, which they went together at least once a month, with their mom writing a note to saying that they were allowed to watch the R-rated movies that were coming out in the 70s, like Jaws. Which is pretty dope.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I don't think you can get away with that in 2026.
No way.
Dave would also watch a ton of TV, which is a pretty run-of-the-mill American experience for most American childhoods. But this would, again, be incredibly influential on his writing and what he writes about, more so than anybody else at that time. We'll talk about that more when we chat about his later works. I've painted a pretty idyllic picture so far, but Dave also had that dark side. He would lash out at his sister both physically and verbally, with one story of him throwing her to the ground in the backyard and dragging her through literal dog shit. This was over a petty fight they both don't remember. He would then literally buy her silence by purchasing her a bike after saving his own money for a long time, providing his parents with an elaborate lie of where he got the money and why she got the bike, which is interesting. But, you know, like I wouldn't say it's that abnormal from childhood behavior at this point that, you know, kids can be cruel to each other.
Sure.
I don't know if you have any stories you want to share. I don't.
No, just in case my mom and dad ever listen to this one, I better keep my mouth shut on that one.
Yeah, well, you know, any questions before we get into something that everybody who has a cursory knowledge of David Foster Wallace before some of his personality traits, because we're getting to the point where some things are going to start popping up.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting to me to I didn't realize that his mother was Canadian, from New Brunswick, and I'm kind of curious how, especially kind of in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that kind of era, how having a multinational background might have affected kind of his worldview and the way that, you know, he identified with being an American, and how that kind of might have affected his works, especially being, you know, a postmodern kind of major figure.
It's a good question. I think her background is Canadian. I don't think she herself grew up in Canada.
I see.
I think she grew up in Maine. But yeah, her grandparents, well, his grandparents were Canadian, but still, that's not uncommon in Maine at all, right? Like to this day. Yeah. And I mean, living in Vermont, you could see who still has roots to Quebec for sure. But
absolutely, yeah.
I would assume that the roots between, well, New Brunswick isn't actually that close to well, no, it is right there. I'm thinking Newfoundland. Never mind. I'm mixing those two up. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's quite a bit of influence on his writing, especially. I mean, he based Avril and Condense on his mother, right, on Sally, and there's a whole Quebec plot line that you're aware of. So I'm sure having that multicultural background influenced him in some way. I just can't tell you how.
Sure.
Yeah. So depression. It began to show at DFW's life around the time he was 10. At least that's the earliest Dave said he first noticed it, but that's pretty damn young to notice it. Quoting his biography, quote, "In a family that prided itself on openness, Wallace never felt safe disclosing himself. He worried then, as he always would later, that to know him too well would be to dislike him, or at least dislike him as much as he disliked himself," unquote. Which, yeah, that is a great way of DT Max highlighting a form of depression, that self-hatred and self-loathing that sometimes comes part of it. Dave would be a very good student academically and turned out to be also a somewhat popular kid because he was also a class clown early on. He always had a crazy sense of humor, sometimes pretty wry, sometimes pretty dirty. Some teachers claim he was the most gifted student they ever taught, and he excelled at literature. It was in his early teens he found two huge discoveries: tennis and marijuana. Now, even though this seems like a joke, because it is funny to think that sweet, sweet Herb has a hot, huge influence on a teenager, If you read anything by DFW, substance dependency is a significant topic he writes about. We'll get more into his writing on addiction in our next episodes. For now, I think it is important to point out that his biographer said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that pot was when he used to reduce his anxiety and calm his nerves as a teen, which, as somebody who used to smoke pot a lot, I have never, not even once, experienced a time where ganja calmed my nerves or reduced my anxiety as an intended effect. It did the opposite. It might happen eventually, but that really, really never happened, and frankly, why I stopped. Still, DT Max claims that this is how he also was able to find a lot deeper inner beauty, which, yeah, that I can understand. He also says Wallace did acid at a really young age and felt so sick to his stomach that he was feeling like he was going to die, which to me, not from any firsthand experience or anything that could be legally actionable, might mean he didn't get the right acid or something, right? Like that. So he usually just stuck to pot at a young age. Anyway, let's pivot about tennis because I don't want to get fired. If you can imagine, tennis was not and currently is not a very popular sport in the American Midwest. David would compare tennis like playing highlight, which at least tennis isn't a sport solely popular brought into the United States because you could gamble on it at the time. That was the history of highlight is they brought it into Miami because there was no gambling laws against it. That's literally why people watched it.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
I know, right? It's
some cool history.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Tennis is a sport that paradoxically suits the wealthy elite and also has the catalyst of the French Revolution. But I digress there, so let's not talk about the French Revolution. Still, Dave was pretty good at it. Definitely better than the average in his youth. And the way he got into tennis is an interesting story. Basically, he won a contest that was part spelling bee and part poetry writing, from what I gathered. Don't know how they combined. And his reward was winning $50 as a trophy. He spent that $50 buying a tennis racket. He was good at hitting the angles and endurance, which is, pretty nice. Sure. No innuendos there. If you briefly read his works, there will always be, any snippet on DFW, any biography, there will always be a bit that he states he was a regionally ranked tennis player that had some serious potential, which is an overstatement. He was ranked 11th in the Middle Illinois Tennis Association, which does not include, in my research, the Chicago area. It's pretty niche.
Yeah, provincial.
Still, tennis would have a big impact on him. He would teach it as a teen to younger kids in summer camps, and when it was time to split up the kids into teams or groups, he would use chapter names from James Joyce's Ulysses as team names. Smarty pants. As college approached, his anxiety also increased. Again, being a stoner didn't help. He would start having anxiety attacks thinking about the future, and D.T. Max, biographer, surmised that basically he was causing the anxiety by his own mental loops. Again, I find this very relatable in some ways, right? Like everybody is going to go, at least many people do, go through that anxiety about figuring out where they want to go to college or what they want to do in their life. It's pretty huge pressure to put on a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
What is a little different is that his anxiety caused him physical illness. And when it came to college, well, he threw up after his first college interview after keeping his composure, which, again, there's the very first scene of Infinite Jest is how in Cadenza freaking out during a college interview. Of course, Dave had a leg up than most people. He had exceptional grades. He was decent at a sport that hardly anyone ever played, though that didn't end up helping him. And he had deep family connections to academia. He would attend Amherst College, which, if you want to learn a little bit more about, listen to our Emily Dickinson episode, because her grandfather was one of the founders of that institution. He began school in 1984, and he to put this perspective of how things were back in the day, the first graduating class that had accepted women in Amherst still had not graduated when Dave was a freshman, which is
Oh,
right, 1984.
yeah.
I I don't remember if
Crazy.
I put this down later, but Dave's father also attended Amherst. That was his alma mater as a bachelor.
Hmm.
Um, so that's another reason why he got in. Something close to a quarter of the student population were legacy students, Dave being one of them. And though not relevant to any of one of his classmates or anybody he really knew, but one of his classmates was the Prince of Monaco.
Oh, cool.
I know. I read that. It's a neat fact.
Yeah.
Um, Dave would mostly be an awkward kid in college as well. His daily routine would get really stoned, go
Nice.
to the dining hall, drink a ton of caffeine. He would put a tea bag in black coffee, which is, I think, pretty gross.
I know
And
you
then
do.
he would study from 5:45 p.m. until the library closed around 6 hours later. Um, as the school year progressed, he found spaces where he can study later, and his biographer states that focusing on getting straight A's and being the most exceptional student was a way of his coping with his mental health. Um, that's what he states. I could see that. I could also see he wants to be an overachiever, right? Um,
Sure.
that I was an overachiever until I went through puberty and started thinking this is silly. But then again, I was not a prodigy. Um, he got along fine with his freshman roommates, but he would mostly socialize with other kids who also studied all night. Um, some of these kids were completely sober. One of them was a person who wanted to become a priest named Mark Costello. They would be friends throughout college and post college. And to be fair to him, one of his like roommates did bring a tarantula as a pet. And I really wouldn't want to be a friend with him if he did that too. Dave suffered from anacrophobia beforehand. So
Oh, nice.
I know, right? Great mix. Things were going well for Dave until he returned to college for his second semester sophomore year. Right, something was clearly off with him when asked by Costello how his Christmas went. He simply said it was very bad and did not extrapolate. So that's, I believe, Christmas sophomore year. It was one of the philosophy professors who actually taught Dave's father as well that noticed he was suffering from severe depression because he also had somebody in the family who suffered from it, and he recognized the symptoms. So he took
Hmm.
him to see a therapist. Dave left school and went home for the rest of that semester. His mother knew what suicidal depression also looked like. It ran in the family, with 2 family members committing suicide on her side because of depression. That's unfortunately foreshadowing. If anybody is going to ruin this sorry if I ruined this for people, but I always like to say that foreshadowing is the sexiest literary devices, but I think this is the one time it's not.
Sure.
Yikes.
Spoiler
Dave,
alert.
I know, right? Dave would drive a school bus during his brief time off, quitting one day after having the student's mouth off on him, which if you're a school bus driver, that's probably par for the course, right?
Sure.
uh, he just like walked off afterwards. I don't know if he left the kids, but that's the description I had. Like, okay.
Yeah.
This time, it was also a time he began to confide to his sister, and they would become friends until his passing. Bad news did continue. After years of rocky relation, it was nothing nefarious, just seemed like things no longer worked out. His mother moved out of the house. Dave felt personally betrayed because his mother didn't really confide in him until after the decision was made. He refused to see his mother at her new apartment. He would also, which is, his way of getting back on her. He would also start seeing somebody named Susie Perkins, a philosophy major at Indiana University, and their relationship developed more over this period in his life. This is the first person that he had a serious relationship of, that was a girlfriend. And, well, we'll get into Dave's relationships later. I started writing them out, and boy, howdy, Cordo, they are extensive. Um, Dave would write letters to his friend Mark, and this would be something a little odd because we are talking about the mid to late 80s. Telephones were a thing. Emails right around the corner. He just preferred
Sure.
to write always, right? He it's just why we have so much about him. It's great. He
Yeah.
also began writing fiction. And here's a description of one of the first short stories he wrote. Quote, one story was called The Clangbirds. Honestly, I'm surprised that's not a name of some indie band. It's about a fictional bird that flies in ever decreasing circles until it disappears up its own ass. In Wallace's story, God ran an existential game show where contestants were asked impossible or paradoxical questions. God wielded the buzzard and no one could stop playing. So yeah, mix of dark humor, I would say, and in a completely unprofessional way, a feeling of being trapped by an existential being and not being able to control your outcome. There's also that television approach, that game show, that I think is very important to hit on here, because honestly, television would be hugely influential through all his works, and we'll get on that again later. This also highlights a lot of what he would write later. Like I said, the extreme event that is pretty horrifying or tragic with dark humor elements spread throughout. David Foster Wallace had a sense of humor that was a mix of immature, dark, complex, absurd, and dry, and he was known for it, which is often a sign of intelligence. He loved to drop an F-bomb here and there, right? I don't know if you noticed that in your reading, but
yeah. No, he's got a colorful vocabulary for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. He would return to Amherst as a different person, with Costello being one of the only people who knew why he took the semester off. He started to dress kind of like a bum and hated the preppy kids. I think this is where he started to experiment with that crazy bandana that he always wore.
Yeah, okay.
I couldn't find an exact date. I tried and looked, but I think this is where it happened.
Yeah, this makes sense.
Shortly around here, yeah. If anyone, I'm gonna definitely post a photo with him in his bandana. It's literally hard to miss. He would gain a small group of friends, one of which was Corey Washington, who would end up working on the particle accelerator in Stanford, and Miller Maley, who was a genius who began college at the age of 12, which is objectively too young for a kid to go to college. Sorry. This group would revive Amherst's temporarily defunct humor magazine called Sabrina. Don't know why it's called Sabrina. I could have looked it up, but there's so much about his life that I didn't go on this tangent. This was a way to really express Wallace's sense of humor, and again gained the group some small notoriety on campus pretty much instantly. An example of his humor was a bit called The Sabrina Brother in the Case of the Hung Hamster. Quote, suddenly a sinister twin-engine airplane came into view, sputtering and backfiring. It lost power and began spinning in toward the hill. It was heading right for the Sabrina brothers. Luckily, at the last minute, the plane ceased to exist. Crikey, exclaimed Joe. It's a good thing we're characters in a highly implausible children's book, or we'd be goners. Unquote. Yeah, completely absurd as humor.
Yeah.
Yeah. His home life outside of college remained a little rocky, with his parents going through marriage counseling, which then became family therapy. And then one day they said the divorce would happen imminently, and then finally his mother began living at home again without explanation. He would hate family therapy, and I think the family life is important to his literature. Speaking of his literature, this is a lit podcast after all. Pardon the dumb 2010s slang pun, but Dave would begin expanding on his being lit with reading postmodern authors that would really change how his storytelling came about. One example of this is Donald Barthelme's The Balloon, which don't need to add an explanation here. It's pretty easy. You can find it online. It's on The New Yorker has it for free online, and just like his parents' reunion, I'm not going to have more of an explanation than that. The other is Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, which is like 20 less than a nice number. Thomas Pynchon, I read The Crying of Lot 49 between finishing the script and going to it. It is kind of just a storyline that leaves you kind of confused, and there's a lot of different explanations, and all of them could be valid. It's a good book, but it's a very Pynchon-esque novel, and like Pynchon would be one of his favorite authors. I will eventually do him. He's still alive. He's not in his 90s,
Oh,
so
cool.
which yeah, it's interesting. He just published a book last year, or 2025. So technically it's last year. Also, there was another friend of his named Charlie McLang, who he met in college, who was the type of wealthy friend who he did drugs with. Wallace smoked pot, of course, but he also liked shrooms quite a lot. Charlie was the person who showed him Pynchon's Lot 49, which, to quote DT Max here, quote, is a story of Oedipa Mass, a young woman trying to uncover a centuries-old conspiracy involving a secret postal organization known as Tristero. Mass, or Moss, it's Maas, travel around California encountering people who gave her clues to the puzzle, or the whole action of the novel may be a hallucination or a hoax set in motion by an ex-boyfriend. The reader is left uncertain. One thing that caught Wallace's eye about the book was the idea that to live in America was to live in a world of confusion, where meaning was refracted and distorted, especially by the media that engulfed and reconfigured every gesture, unquote. I think that's a great explanation. His friend Costello, is probably his closest friend at this time, said that Wallace found reading Pynchon was like Bob Dylan finding Woody Guthrie. Pynchon is one of those authors, I said I actually got Davis to start reading Gravity's Rainbow. He was the one who
cool.
Davis was the one who showed me Gravity's Rainbow, and then I kind of pushed him into try to reading that. So I'll probably get him into reading that, and hopefully he will actually read a book for this podcast next time he's on. Calling you out, Davis. I don't think you listen to every episode. Still, Dave is depression came back. Foster's did. He was prescribed an antidepressant, this first one, to help his anxiety and depression. He started to think about self-harm and had philosophical conversations with his friend about suicide. Dave had to leave school for the second time, losing his scholarship this time. His psychiatrist most likely tried prescribing different antidepressants to see which one worked, but Dave was finally told he had a biological condition that he would have for the rest of his life then. He also became a dark legend on campus for his intelligence and his mental health when he finally returned. There were rumors about him getting electroshock therapy, which really weren't rumors realistically. These didn't come out of thin air. He wrote and published a story in the Amherst Lit magazine about a manic depressive who had the choice of antidepressants or electroshock therapy or EST, which is crazy. They still did EST in the 80s. I think at this point it's completely debunked, and nobody does it anymore for depression, at least. Yeah, they do, little shocks for muscle spasms and stuff like that, needling. I've had it happen before. It's wonderful. It immediately helps and soothes your muscles that are cramping. But that's a very different thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Dave was a superb student. The lowest grade he got in his bachelor's, I believe, was an A-. One in philosophy his freshman year, and the next in a creative writing class. That teacher, specifically that creative writing teacher, he did not like. So I feel like it's something that the biography touches upon is the nature of creative writing classes, and the grading is a highly subjective process based on how the professor teaches writing, what genre they're looking for, what genre within the genre, subgenre they want to grade, and it's something like they had to strictly keep the writing norms, or if they were okay with experimentation. Honestly, I've had this personal experience as well through academia, and this would dictate DFW's path as well. He also butted heads a lot with this teacher specifically, but with a lot of people in academia, because that kind of just the biography made it sound like everybody was a little petty and jealous about who's publishing what, which sure, it's competition, which is weird to say competitiveness in literature exists, but it does. Any questions? Is there a lot of competition up in the air when you're flying? I hope not.
Oh, no.
Okay. No. Good. All right. I'm going to take that as a solid now.
Sure.
His senior year, he was still the very top of his class. His closest friend, Costello, had graduated on time, so he was a year above him at that point. And he chose to try to one-up his friend who graduated, after writing a thesis for his philosophy major and then literally write a book in English. You see, Costello graduated double summa cum laude, or he summed cum laude a lot, and Dave wasn't going to let him bask in the glory of being the first student in 40 years to do so all by his lonesome. DFW was very competitive as well.
Sure.
His expertise in philosophy was logic, like I mentioned earlier. He loved the Austro-British philosopher Ludwig, I think it's Jose or Jose, I don't know, but it's spelled Jose. Johann, it could be Jose, I don't know how that's pronounced in German, Austrian German. Johann and Wittgenstein, or Wittgenstein. It's Wittgenstein. That I'm going to butcher. Yeah, he loved him specifically, who died in 1951, with most of his works actually being celebrated posthumously. I don't dabble much in philosophy. I will simply quote a passage from his Wikipedia article that I think is important to understand DFW. Wittgenstein asks the reader to think of language as a multiplicity of language games within which parts of language develop and function. He argues that the bewitchments of philosophical problems arise from philosophers' misguided attempts to consider the meaning of words independently of their context, usage, and grammar, what he called language gone on holiday.
Interesting.
All right. So, you're using language almost as a function of some sort of mathematical sequence, which, makes sense.
Yeah.
So for philosophy, he chose to refute a paper about how all things were either true or false, and argues life is predestined, right? That this is what the paper he's refuting. This is a terrible summation because this isn't a philosophy podcast. And basically this stems from a different argument that Ludwig, the philosopher, had as a topic altogether. So Ludwig wrote something, this other philosopher refuted it, and David Foster Wallace refuted that topic, right? Cool. Then he chose to write a novel, about his idol's philosophical questions and theories, about Wittgenstein's theories. His work ethic, again, preceded him. People actually talked about how much he was writing. He became almost this mythical legend. He was, like, after all, a genius student who had to take time off because he almost committed suicide, and he saved face, right? Like he had a mental breakdown, and the way he saved face was he lied about saying that his friend from back home had almost committed suicide. Excuse me. There has been no suicide attempts at this point in time. The book ended about 500 pages, which is fucking insane for a senior thesis. That's just unbelievably impressive. Not to put bragging, but I will put a little bit of my own senior year writing class, and I had my own creative writing thesis. That work ended up being 225 pages long, and that was impressive for the course of the time.
Huge.
That was over a semester. He more than doubled what I did, and I really focused on that book. This would end up being published as his first book, called The Broom of the System, in a few years. But jumping a little ahead over here, right? I don't know if you are familiar with any other of his works at all, Cordo, right?
No, I don't think that I'm familiar with him as a person. He was actually a favorite of my senior year of high school literature teacher. So we had quotes and stuff all over the classroom, but no, nothing. I haven't read any of his other works in entirety.
Yeah, I mean, some of the others, we'll talk about them later after we chat about the publishing and what I would recommend based off what I've read. So being a senior, that means 23, 24 range for him, and writing a book that length in a short period of time and having that published is almost always unheard of, right? In this modern day and age, even in the 80s and 90s, it was very exceptional. Like many young people after graduating college, DFW, goes back to his hometown and doesn't know what he should do next. He decides on applying to schools to earn a master's of fine arts and creative writing, which is really blossoming as an MFA at the time. Realistically, MFAs were not very popular even 10 years before that. With his grades, his academic connections, because, besides his parents, his closest friends in college outside were a few of the professors that we mentioned here and there, and his other thesis, DFW could pretty much apply to get any MFA program that he wanted, right? Even though this is super rare, again, he can get anything. He was accepted into the Iowa Writers Workshop, which may or may not be a CIA psyop. Kind of, just kidding. But maybe not really. I have read this. I don't know if this conspiracy is true. I don't want to destroy my chances of getting in. Thanks, Wikipedia.
Nice.
Right? The Iowa Writers Workshop is one of the most prestigious programs a writer can be admitted to, and that's indisputable. That's worldwide. Still, he got into other colleges and ultimately chose the University of Arizona because he believed that program fit his writing style better. U of A also gave him a scholarship specifically, because of his grades and on merit, and he was a great writer. So that was kind of another turning point. But I don't believe, at least nowadays, you don't have to pay to be in the Iowa Writers Workshop. They actually give you a small stipend. Don't know if it was in the 80s. And part of his submission was a snippet of The Broom of the System. During that summer, however, his depression affected him severely, and he had to be hospitalized again. From this time, his psychiatrist prescribed him Nardil, which was a powerful antidepressant. Throughout DFW's life, he would be prescribed a stew of different drugs, which is one of the many ways he became so familiar with drugs. But Nardil would be a pretty much constant throughout that life. And, it would actually play a pretty major role because of it. Some to benefit him and others, not to. We've mentioned his depression many times in this podcast, and frankly, obviously, it's inextricable from the life for many reasons. So, if that makes you squeamish, listener, I'm explicitly not fucking sorry. Many people suffer from depression, and from my understanding, Wallace suffered unipolar depression, which means, and this is not a clinical observation by any means or any definition, when he gets into that funk, to put it lightly, it's very difficult for him to break through his depression, which is some foreshadowing. Again, it often is said to be the sexiest of literary devices, but we'll talk about his sex life later instead. Yeah, I'm not going to get Stephen Colbert here. Canceled. Sorry, I love Stephen Colbert. God, imagine if that's what he's known for. He made in his early life an entire show and just career based off of satirizing the right, and then it's when he became his own person when he got canceled. Think about that.
There's some irony in that. Yeah.
Oh, it's. Yeah, there's also rumors that he's potentially going to run for president, which would make him a Zelensky figure by definition, which is crazy too.
Wow. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, hopefully if he gets elected, we don't go into war. As current events unfold. He made his way out west via aeroplane over the land, and met with a college friend who he then had a romantic relationship with. I think, honestly, it's best to minimize the names who he slept with for posterity's sake at this point, so people don't randomly ask them questions about him later. Either way, she helped him a ton and even moved to Arizona with him when he went to get his MFA at the U of A, of course. It was also filled with something many people had to deal with, the UFA, which is, again, academic jealousy. Look, I love literature and I'm very sympathetic towards academia, but no matter where you end up, there is this gross strain of human emotions that is that jealousy. And he experienced it heavily in his classes because he was a student who got picked up, with his first novel being published effectively during his first year in his master's because it was accepted during that time. right?
Okay.
Wildly impressive again. He was a brilliant person who wrote a super heady book that certain types of publishers wanted to publish back in the day. Jury's out now 30 years later about whether or not heady publishers even exist, but we'll see. Or at least they don't take these kind of exceptions and risks anymore. Um,
Hmm.
the novel was sent to a number of literary agents, and Bonnie Nadell really liked the cocky tone of the book. She would ask for more pages from Dave and then send them to publishers. And an editor at Penguin named Jerry Howard responded almost immediately. Howard would also be the editor for Thomas Pynchon's Gravity Rainbow that we'd mentioned earlier. And I would like to say, but both Nadell and Howard are credited for discovering Dave here. One
Hmm.
thing Nadell, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's Nadell's boss, asked of their client is to use his full name, David Foster Wallace, as there was already a famous author named David Rains Wallace publishing books at the same time. Uh, I think it was like mystery crime novels. I don't know. This was the first time I heard of him, so he's a little bit obscure now, but he was pretty prominent back in the day.
Okay.
David Foster Wallace stated, quote, "I would have called myself Seymour Butts if they told me to." Funny dude. So Wallace
Yeah.
was offered a $20,000 advance, right? Which is just under $60K as of September of 2025, which is a shit ton of money for an advance for a brand new unknown author. Even not adjusting for inflation to this day, getting $20,000 is a lot.
Yeah.
Wallace was absolutely thrilled. But this also led to a lot of professional jealousy, as I mentioned earlier, as he, again, was a first-year master student among professional authors who frankly have a hard enough time publishing their own work. Yep. And he would receive the Whiting Prize or the Whiting Award for his book. I mean, the book got reviewed by the New York Times after all. So this was an obscure book by an obscure author. It was an obscure author at the time, but eventually it led him to some fame and accreditation. The New York Times really picked him up, though this particular
Oh.
New York Times editor or critic never really liked David Foster Wallace, or he was always very critical of him. So,
Hmm.
it did well for a first publication. Now, we're about an hour in, Cordo, and I need to get back into work. And I know that my wife needs to free up her hands to work herself, so I need to take care of the baby.
No worries.
I have 4 more pages of this first script, so I think we're going to have a 4-parter here,
Okay.
as opposed to a 3-parter, and we'll schedule something later to chat again. But any comments, any questions about this first part? I know I talked mostly this time, and next time I'm going to give you more space. I acknowledge that. But
Oh, no
anything you
worries.
want to add at this point?
No, it's been fascinating to listen to his early history because I'm just starting to, again, I don't want to jump too far into the future with Infinite Jest, but I'm starting to see how he really seems to everything that he writes about very confidently in that book. You can see where it comes from, his experience in Arizona, his experience in New England, Canada, the prescription drugs, tennis. It's fascinating to see how this all comes together from a place of personal experience, and I think that adds to the power of his work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely chat more about Infinite Jest. I know that you still have a little bit left, and I'm not going to do any spoilers.
Yeah,
And that'll send that script along when I personally have to finish writing it, because it's such a complex book that I feel like it's actually kind of difficult to organize my
yeah,
thoughts. But
absolutely.
it's funny. It's been months since I've read it, and it's just to prove. I was thinking about this, and I'll probably mention it later. But if there's that stupid icebreaker question that I've had before, like if you had to bring a couple of books, let's say 3 books to a desert island, and you're abandoned there for a short period of time, which one would it be? And I always found the question kind of stupid, but now, like thinking about it even superficially or a little bit more critically, I think Infinite Jest would be one of them. Not to say it's
Hmm.
one of my top 3 favorite books by any means. It's just like I could reread that 1,000 times over. So
Yeah.
that's the point of it. Spoilers ahead, guys.
Sure.
And we will chat more about other works that I read, and get to the plot of The Broom of the System early on in the next part. But Cordo, do you have anything that you want to mention or any plugs that you have or anything like that? Do you want to fly Hawaiian Airlines or?
Yeah, look out for us. We're Hawaiian Airlines, now operated by Alaska Airlines. So we're looking forward to helping get everybody from the East Coast to the West Coast, now to Korea and Tokyo through Seattle, Rome and London and Reykjavik soon to come. So we would love to have you on board, and thank you so much for giving us your consideration.
Great. And so now I understand how you got to Uzbekistan with that Korea connection, right? So like,
Yeah, we
sail.
started in Korea.
Oh man, that's a pretty great place to be. So let's do my plugs as well. I'm going to plug my Patreon. That's Lost in the Library on Patreon. And if anybody wants to donate, please do so. I am almost at the point where I can pay for an annual subscription through all the through the website that I use. Any questions, you can send them to lostinthelibrarypodcast@gmail.com. You follow us on Instagram, again, Lost in the Library there. I have a Substack. That's my name, @Fil Deptula. It's always under development, and anything I put up there is free as of this recording. The first major work that I want to reference as a source was Every Story is a Love Story, A Life of David Foster Wallace by D.T. Max. It's a pretty good book. I'll talk about it a little later in the next episodes. I did write this down as a plug. I just couldn't find the right place. Yeah, right. I did write it down. So I did some of my due diligence. Of course, the books by David Foster Wallace I read for this was Infinite Jest, a supposedly fun thing that I'll never do again, and also I wrote Infinite Jest down here twice. That is absolutely not true. Brief Interviews with Hideous Men was the last book I read for him. And then some wiki articles about inverse cost quality law, The Broom of the System, Infinite Jest as well, and Yaddo, which is a spoiler, and then Ludwig Wittgenstein's Wikipedia, because I just needed some cursory things to look up quickly. All right. Happy New Year, Cordo.
Likewise, Phil. Always a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for having me.
I'm hoping that this recording goes well, and this will make posting podcasts easier from here on in. Cheers.
Cheers.